Okay, so we're tackling a topic today that I think a lot of people might not really, fully grasp. It's about spitting behavior in individuals with autism.
Yeah, and it's definitely one of those things that can be, well, really tough for everyone involved.
For sure. And this guide, Autism Spitting Behavior, a guide for parents and caregivers, it really dives deep, like it helps you see beyond those initial reactions.
Because it's so easy to jump to conclusions, right?
Exactly. But what we need to remember is that spitting, it's rarely, like almost never intentional. It's not meant to be mean.
Right. It's more like they're trying to communicate something.
Yeah. It's like their way of navigating, I don't know, a world that just feels like too much sometimes.
Think about it like this. Imagine if everything, like all your senses, were turned up way too high. The lights are blinding. Every sound is deafening. Even the softest touch feels like sandpaper. For some people with autism, that's their reality.
Wow, that's intense.
Yeah, it is. And so spitting, it could be their way of saying, hey, this is too much, or I need a break.
Right, like a signal. It makes sense when you put it that way.
And this is where it gets really interesting. The guide talks about these two concepts,
Mm.
sensory seeking and sensory avoidant behavior.
Mm.
So some individuals with autism might, actually crave certain sensations.
While others want to avoid them at all costs.
Exactly.
So how does spitting fit into all of this?
Well, it could go either way. Like imagine a kid who just can't stand the texture of mashed potatoes.
Oh, I know some kids like that. Picky eaters.
Right. So for them, spitting might be a way to get rid of that awful, at least to them, sensory input.
It's like a way to feel in control again.
Exactly. But then on the other hand, you could have a child who's really fascinated by, I don't know, the feeling of saliva, the texture.
And they might spit just to experience that sensation again.
You got it. It's all about that sensory experience for them.
Wow, so even though it's the same behavior, the why behind it can be totally different.
You see what I mean? And we haven't even touched on the communication aspect yet.
Because for individuals who maybe haven't mastered spoken language yet or who have difficulty communicating verbally, spitting can be another form of communication, right?
Totally. It's like their way of trying to get a message across, even if we don't immediately get it.
It's a reminder that we need to understand what's motivating the behavior, not just react to the spitting itself.
100%. And that leads us to the impact of spitting, because it does have ripple effects. It's not just about the act itself.
Right. There are social and emotional consequences, too, for everyone involved.
And it's something we need to talk about more openly. The guide mentioned that almost 80% of caregivers said they felt isolated or judged because of their child spitting.
Wow. That's a lot. It's heartbreaking to hear that.
It is. But it also shows just how important it is to raise awareness, to help people understand that there's more to the story than what they see on the surface.
It's tough, right? Because your first instinct might not be the most, I don't know, understanding, but that's why I thought those case studies in the guide were so helpful.
Oh, absolutely. Those real-life examples really bring it all home.
There was one in particular about a little boy who would spit during his therapy sessions. It really stuck with me.
That one's so powerful because, it makes you see things from the child's perspective.
Yeah.
Like, put yourself in his shoes. You're in this unfamiliar place with a person you might not know that well, trying to do all these new things.
And just overwhelming for him.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So even though the therapy is supposed to be helping him, it's actually a source of stress, which then leads to the spitting.
And instead of like punishing him for it, the therapist in the study, they did something really interesting.
They changed their whole approach. They started focusing more on, like you were saying earlier, meeting the boy's needs instead of just reacting to the behavior.
Yeah. Like giving him positive reinforcement when he was doing well and then using redirection when the spitting started happening.
And guess what? It worked. As the boy felt more understood, the spitting decreased like crazy. He was able to actually focus on the therapy.
It's amazing how much of a difference that understanding can make, which leads me to something else I was thinking about. If spitting is often, connected to sensory overload, are there things we can do to prevent it from happening in the first place?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
And the guide actually talks about this thing called sensory support. Basically, it's all about creating an environment where someone with autism can feel calmer and more in control of their sensory experiences.
So like adjusting that sensory volume knob you were talking about earlier.
Precisely. And it's going to look different for everyone, depending on their sensory needs.
Yeah.
So for someone who gets overwhelmed by, say, bright lights and loud noises.
You'd want to create a space that's really calming and quiet.
Exactly. Think soft lighting, minimal distractions, maybe some noise-canceling headphones.
Like a little sensory retreat.
Yes. But then For someone who's more sensory seeking, it might be about giving them opportunities to, safely engage those senses.
So that could be like a designated area with different textured toys, maybe some things to touch and feel.
Exactly. Or even just letting them move around, take breaks throughout the day. The key is to really pay attention to what each person needs and then adapt the environment accordingly.
So it's about being flexible and really understanding the individual, not just applying some like one-size-fits-all approach.
100%. And you know what else goes hand in hand with sensory support? Teaching alternative behaviors.
Right. So giving them other ways to express what they need.
Exactly. So instead of spitting when they're frustrated, maybe they learn to use a sign, a picture card, or even just say, "break, please." Anything that helps them communicate more effectively.
That's so important. It's about giving them the tools to navigate the world in a way that works for them and helps others understand them better.
Absolutely. And the great thing is there's a ton of support out there for families who are dealing with this. The guide even mentions a bunch of different organizations.
It does. I was just thinking about that. It mentions Autism Speaks, the National Autism Association, the Autism Society.
Exactly. Those are all fantastic resources. They have tons of information on sensory sensitivities, on behavior strategies.
Yeah, it's like, you're not alone in this. There are people who get it, who've been there,
Yeah.
which is so important, because parenting and caregiving, it's already a lot.
For sure.
Yeah.
Having that support system can make all the difference.
It really can. We've talked about a lot today, from like the reasons behind spitting to those really specific ways we can help. But there was one thing in the guide that really got me thinking. It talked about, well, kind of how society plays a role in all of this.
Oh, absolutely. Like, it's not just about the individual, right? It's about the world around them, too.
Exactly. What if we all, as a society, really understood sensory differences?
And not just when it comes to autism, but just, in general.
Right. Like, what if we created environments, our schools, our workplaces, even just like public places, and we designed them with sensory sensitivities in mind, and not just as an afterthought, but like from the very beginning?
Wow. That would be huge.
It would. It would be like, instead of trying to fit in, it's about making space for everyone.
I love that. It's about embracing neurodiversity, in all its forms.
And who knows, maybe in a world like that, we'd see less of the behaviors that we struggle to understand because we'd be meeting each other's needs right from the start.
It's a beautiful thought and a goal worth striving for sure.
Absolutely. And on that note, we're going to wrap up our deep dive into autism spitting behavior. We hope this has given you a new understanding of why it happens, how to support those who experience it, and maybe even a new way to think about what a truly inclusive world could look like. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, keep asking those tough questions and diving deep into the topics that matter.